Hello everyone. Tonight we'll explore what life was really like in ancient Persia. From the dusty villages where farmers paid their taxes in grain, to the perfumed gardens where nobles plotted palace intrigue. Feel free to say hi in the comments. Let me know what time you're watching this and where you're tuning in from. I love seeing where everyone's listening from around the world. Picture yourself standing in the middle of what we now call Iran. About 2,500 years ago, the sun beats down on endless stretches of arid landscape, broken by patches of green where clever irrigation channels bring life to the desert. You're witnessing the birth of something extraordinary, an empire that will stretch from India to Greece, built not just on conquest but on an entirely new way of organizing human civilization. This is the story of ancient Persia, but not the version you might know from Hollywood movies with golden palaces and evil emperors. This is the real story, told through the daily lives of ordinary people who woke up each morning in mud brick houses, tended their sheep, paid their taxes, and somehow became part of the largest empire the world had ever seen. Let's start at the very beginning, with a man whose name would echo through history, Cyrus the Great. But before we talk about kings and conquests, let's talk about the world Cyrus was born into, around 600 BCE. Imagine a landscape of scattered tribes, each with their own customs, gods, and ways of making a living from the harsh Iranian plateau. The Persians themselves were originally nomadic people, moving their herds of sheep and goats across the grasslands, following the seasons and the rain. They lived in felt tents, told stories around campfires, and measured wealth not in gold coins but in the number of animals they owned. A man might say, "I have 40 sheep, 20 goats, and 3 good horses," and everyone would know exactly where he stood in society. But the world was changing. Powerful empires surrounded these wandering tribes. To the west, the Lydians had invented something revolutionary, coins made of precious metal that could buy anything from bread to horses. To the east, the Babylonians had built cities with walls so thick that chariots could race along the top. And everywhere there were tax collectors, soldiers, and administrators demanding tribute from anyone who wanted to live in peace. Young Cyrus grew up hearing the adults argue around those campfires. Some said they should submit to the Median Empire that controlled much of their territory. Others wanted to keep moving, staying one step ahead of any king who might try to tax their flocks. But Cyrus had a different idea altogether. What if, instead of running from empire, they built their own? The genius of Cyrus wasn't just military, though he was certainly a skilled commander. His real innovation was in understanding something that previous conquerors had missed. Most empires were built on the simple principle of do what we say or we'll destroy you. Cyrus realized that people would actually cooperate more willingly if you let them keep their own customs, worship their own gods, and live according to their own traditions, as long as they acknowledged Persian authority and paid their share of taxes. This might seem obvious to us now, but in the ancient world it was revolutionary. When the Assyrians conquered a city, they typically destroyed the local temples, scattered the population, and imposed their own culture by force. When Cyrus conquered a city, he would march to the main temple, make offerings to the local gods, and announce that he was now their protector. The locals would look at each other and think, well, this is unexpected. Take the famous case of Babylon, one of the greatest cities in the ancient world. Previous conquerors had tried to take Babylon by siege, starving the population and destroying the walls. Cyrus simply redirected the river that flowed through the city, marched his army along the dry riverbed, and captured Babylon without a single building being damaged. Then, instead of looting the temples, he restored them. Instead of enslaving the population, he freed the prisoners who had been held there by the previous regime, including thousands of Jewish exiles who were finally allowed to return home and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. News of this spread throughout the known world. Here was a conqueror who actually made life better for the people he conquered. City after city opened their gates to the Persian army, not because they had been defeated in battle, but because they had heard that Persian rule meant protection, prosperity, and the right to live according to their own customs. But what did this mean for ordinary people? Let's follow the story of a typical farming family in what used to be the Babylonian countryside, now part of the growing Persian Empire. The family wakes before dawn in their mud brick house. The father, let's call him Darius, though that wasn't yet a royal name, steps outside to check the irrigation channels that bring water from the distant mountains to his barley fields. His wife grinds grain for the morning bread using a stone quern that her grandmother had used before her. Their children help with the daily chores, feeding the chickens, milking the goats and checking the date palms for ripe fruit. Life follows the rhythm of the seasons and the irrigation schedule. When it's time to plant, the whole village works together, flooding the fields with precious water and pressing barley seeds into the mud. When it's time to harvest, they work from sunrise to sunset, cutting grain with bronze-bladed sickles and threshing it on circular floors made of hard-packed earth. But now there's something new in their lives: the Persian tax system. Every year officials arrive from the provincial capital to assess how much each family owes to the imperial treasury. But instead of the arbitrary demands that previous rulers had made, the Persian system is surprisingly organized and, dare we say it, fair. The officials carry detailed records written on clay tablets. They know exactly how much land each family farms, how many animals they own, and what the average harvest has been in recent years. They don't just demand whatever they feel like taking. Instead, they follow standardized rates set by the imperial administration. A family farming 10 acres of irrigated barley might owe the equivalent of 2 acres worth of grain, paid either in actual barley or in the silver coins that are becoming more common throughout the empire. But that's 20% of our harvest, Darius might complain to his neighbor as they watch the officials measure their fields. True, his neighbor might reply, but remember what it was like under the old regime. The local governor would show up with his soldiers and take whatever he wanted. Sometimes it was half our grain, sometimes our best sheep, sometimes our sons for his army. At least now we know what to expect. And there's something else. In exchange for their taxes, the Persian government provides services that previous rulers never bothered with. The royal roads that connect the major cities are kept in excellent repair, with guard stations every 15 miles to protect travelers from bandits. Merchants can travel safely from one end of the empire to the other, which means that goods from far away are available in local markets. Darius can now buy iron tools that are sharper and last longer than the bronze implements his father used. His wife can purchase silk cloth and spices that come from the far eastern provinces. Their children can see traders from Greece, India, and Egypt passing through their village, speaking strange languages and wearing exotic clothes. The Persian Empire isn't just about conquest and taxes. Speaking of those roads, let's take a journey along the most famous of them all, the royal road that connected the imperial capital at Susa with the western provinces. This wasn't just a dirt track worn by the feet of travelers. It was a carefully engineered highway, wide enough for 2 carts to pass each other, with stone bridges over rivers and drainage ditches to prevent washouts during the rainy season. Every 15 miles, there's a post station where the royal messengers can change horses and rest for the night. These stations are like small fortresses, with thick walls, guard towers, and accommodations for both official travelers and merchants who can afford to pay for a safe place to sleep. The post station keeper might greet arriving travelers with the standard Persian welcome. "Peace be upon you, travelers. Are you carrying messages from the great king, or are you merchants seeking shelter for the night?" A messenger carrying official dispatches would identify himself with a sealed authorization and be given the best room and the fastest horses. A merchant would pay a small fee for a space in the common sleeping area and the right to park his laden camels inside the protective walls. These stations buzz with activity and conversation. Travelers share news from distant provinces. Merchants negotiate deals for goods they've never seen before, and local people come to trade their surplus grain or handicrafts for manufactured items from the great cities. "I've just come from Babylon," a spice merchant might tell the gathered crowd, "and the markets there are full of goods from India: pepper, cinnamon, silk cloth, and ivory ornaments. The great king's new policies have made trade safer than it's ever been." "What about the Greek cities?" someone else might ask. "Are they still causing trouble on the western borders?" "Some of them," the merchant would reply, "but many have submitted and agreed to pay tribute. Persian gold is welcome everywhere, and Persian protection has made the sea lanes safe for honest traders." But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're still in the early days of the empire, when Cyrus is transforming from a tribal leader into the ruler of half the known world. The administrative systems that will make the Persian Empire famous for its efficiency are still being developed. As the empire grows, so does the need for a capital city that can handle the complexities of governing dozens of different peoples across thousands of miles. Cyrus chooses several locations for different purposes. Pasargadae, in the Persian heartland, becomes his ceremonial capital, where he builds a simple but elegant tomb that still stands today. Susa, An ancient Mesopotamian city with existing administrative infrastructure becomes the practical center for day-to-day governance. But it's Cyrus's successor, Darius I, who creates the most spectacular capital of all, the city we know as Persepolis. Construction begins around 515 BCE, and for the next 50 years, craftsmen from across the empire work to create something unprecedented, a city designed specifically to demonstrate the power, wealth, and cultural sophistication of the Persian Empire. Walking through Persepolis in its heyday would have been like visiting a combination of Washington, D.C., the United Nations headquarters, and Disney World all rolled into one. The approach to the city leads up a broad stone stairway, carved with life-sized figures representing all the different peoples of the empire. Here are Mesopotamians carrying tribute of gold and silver, Egyptians bringing exotic animals, Indians with precious stones, Greeks with fine pottery, and dozens of other delegations, each carefully depicted in their traditional dress and carrying the products their regions were famous for. But these aren't just decorations, they're a visual representation of how the Persian Empire actually works. This is an empire built on diversity, where each region contributes what it does best, and everyone benefits from the security and prosperity that comes from being part of something larger than any individual kingdom could achieve on its own. The main audience hall at Persepolis could hold thousands of people, and during the great festivals, representatives from every corner of the empire would gather to renew their oaths of loyalty and present their annual tribute to the great king. But this wasn't the grim submission ceremony you might imagine. It was more like a combination trade fair, cultural festival, and diplomatic conference. Delegations would set up temporary pavilions around the city, displaying the finest products their regions had to offer. Egyptian linen, Chinese silk, Indian spices, Greek olive oil, and Scythian goldwork would all be available for purchase or trade. Cooks from different provinces would prepare their traditional foods, filling the air with the aromas of exotic spices and unfamiliar cooking methods. "Have you tried the Indian curry?" a Babylonian merchant might ask his Egyptian colleague as they sample foods from the various provincial pavilions. "Too spicy for me," the Egyptian might reply, "but that Persian rice dish with the nuts and dried fruit is excellent, and the Greek wine is much better than what we get at home." Children from the various delegations would play together, learning words in each other's languages and trading small gifts like carved wooden toys or colored glass beads. Their parents would conduct serious business during the day and enjoy elaborate dinner parties in the evening, building the personal relationships that kept the empire's vast network of trade and communication functioning smoothly. But what about the ordinary residents of Persepolis? The city wasn't just a ceremonial center. It was home to thousands of craftsmen, administrators, servants, and their families, all of whom had their own daily routines and concerns. Let's visit the workshop of a stone carver who spends his days working on the endless decorative reliefs that cover every surface of the palace complex. He wakes before dawn in his small house in the craftsman's quarter, eats a breakfast of bread, cheese, and weak beer, and walks to work through streets that are already busy with other workers heading to their assignments. His workshop is a covered area near the main construction site, where he and a dozen other carvers spend their days turning rough blocks of limestone into detailed figures of animals, plants, and human beings. The work requires tremendous skill and patience. A single mistake can ruin weeks of work, and the standards set by the royal overseers are extremely high. Remember, the master carver tells his apprentices as they begin work on a new section showing tribute bearers from the eastern provinces, every figure must be perfect. The great king himself will see this work, and so will visitors from every corner of the empire. Our craftsmanship represents the glory of Persia. The apprentices nod seriously as they select their bronze chisels and begin the delicate work of carving facial features and clothing details. They've spent years learning their trade, starting with simple geometric patterns and gradually working up to the complex human and animal figures that decorate the most important buildings. During their lunch break, they might sit in the shade of a partially completed wall and share food and gossip with workers from other trades. The plasterers are complaining about the quality of the latest shipment of gypsum from the quarries. The painters are excited about a new pigment that's arrived from Egypt, a brilliant blue that will make the painted decorations even more spectacular. The carpenters are discussing the engineering challenges involved in creating the massive wooden beams that support the audience hall's roof. All of these workers are well paid by the standards of the ancient world. The Persian government understands that creating something as magnificent as Persepolis requires attracting the best craftsmen from across the empire, and the best craftsmen expect good wages, decent working conditions, and respect for their skills. But Persepolis isn't just about showing off imperial wealth and power. It's also designed to be functional, and some of the most interesting areas are the ones that visitors never see. The administrative wings where hundreds of scribes and clerks keep track of the empire's incredibly complex bureaucracy. Let's spend some time in the Treasury Records Office, where teams of scribes maintain detailed accounts of tribute payments, military expenses, and construction costs. These men, and they are mostly men, though there are some female scribes as well, are the unsung heroes of the Persian Empire. Without their meticulous record-keeping, it would be impossible to govern an empire that stretches from India to Egypt. The head of the records office might be briefing a new scribe on his duties. Your job is to maintain accurate records of all tribute payments from the Lydian satrapy. Every payment must be recorded on a clay tablet with the date, the amount, and the name of the official who received it. At the end of each month, you'll prepare a summary report for the royal treasurer. What if there's a discrepancy? The new scribe might ask. Then you investigate immediately, his supervisor would reply. The great king's government depends on honest and accurate record-keeping. If a provincial governor is skimming tribute money for himself, we need to know about it. If a region is having trouble meeting its tax obligations because of drought or other problems, we need to know about that too so we can adjust the requirements accordingly. This attention to administrative detail is one of the secrets of Persian success. Previous empires often collapsed because corruption and inefficiency made it impossible to coordinate activities across large distances. The Persian system, with its standardized procedures, regular reporting, and professional bureaucracy, can actually govern effectively across thousands of miles. But we've been spending a lot of time in the imperial capitals. What about life in the provinces, where most people actually lived? Let's visit a typical Persian provincial city, perhaps in what we now call Turkey, during the reign of Darius I. The city is built around a central fortress where the Persian governor lives with his family and retinue. The fortress isn't designed to oppress the local population. Instead, it's meant to provide security and demonstrate that this region is under Persian protection. The governor's main job isn't to extract as much wealth as possible, but to maintain peace, collect reasonable taxes, and ensure that local disputes are resolved fairly. The governor holds court every morning in the fortress's main hall, hearing complaints and petitions from local residents. A typical morning might include a dispute between two merchants over a failed business deal, a complaint from farmers that bandits have been stealing their sheep, and a request from the city's religious leaders for permission to rebuild a temple that was damaged in an earthquake. Tell me about these bandits, the governor might say to the farmers who have come to seek help. How many men, what weapons do they carry, and where do they hide? Perhaps 20 men, Lord Governor, one of the farmers would reply. They have swords and spears and horses for quick escape. They hide in the hills to the north, where the terrain is too rough for chariots to pursue them. I'll send a patrol of my cavalry to deal with them, the governor would promise. In the meantime, I suggest that you organize your own watch system, take turns guarding your flocks, and send a signal fire if the bandits appear. My soldiers will respond as quickly as possible. This kind of practical problem-solving is typical of Persian administration. The goal isn't to create a rigid system where every decision must be referred to higher authority. Instead, provincial governors are given considerable autonomy to deal with local issues, as long as they stay within the broad guidelines set by imperial policy. The city's population is a mixture of Persian colonists, local people who were living there before the conquest, and immigrants from other parts of the empire who have come seeking new opportunities. This diversity is visible in the marketplace, where you can hear half a dozen languages being spoken and see goods from every corner of the known world. A Persian settler who has established a successful pottery workshop might be teaching his trade to local apprentices, sharing techniques that he learned in Fars, but adapting them to work with local clay and firing materials. His pottery combines Persian designs with local decorative traditions, creating something new that appeals to customers from both cultures. The secret, he might tell his apprentices as they shape clay on their wheels, is to understand what your customers want. Persians like geometric patterns and animal figures. The local people prefer plant designs and abstract shapes, but everyone wants pottery that's strong, waterproof, and beautiful to look at. Nearby, a Phoenician merchant has set up a stall selling luxury goods imported from the Mediterranean coast. Purple dye, fine glassware, and carved ivory ornaments attract customers who have prospered under Persian rule and can afford to spend money on beautiful objects. "This glass cup was made in Sidon," the merchant explains to a potential customer, holding up a delicate vessel decorated with gold leaf. "The craftsmen there have techniques that are known nowhere else in the world. Notice how thin the walls are, yet the cup is still strong enough for daily use." The customer, a local landowner who has done well by supplying grain to the Persian garrison, examines the cup carefully before nodding his agreement to the price. Such transactions happen dozens of times every day, as Persian rule creates the stability and prosperity that allows luxury trade to flourish. But life isn't all successful merchants and contented farmers. The Persian Empire, like any large political system, has its share of problems and conflicts. Let's look at some of the challenges that ordinary people face in this vast empire. First, there's the simple problem of communication. Even with the excellent road system and efficient postal service, it can take weeks or months for messages to travel from the provinces to the imperial capitals and back. This means that local officials often have to make important decisions without being able to consult their superiors. A tax collector in a remote province might arrive in a village just as the harvest is ending, only to discover that locusts have destroyed half the crop. The standard tax rate would be impossible for the farmers to pay without facing starvation. Does he collect the full amount anyway, following his written instructions? Does he reduce the tax and hope that his superiors will approve of his decision? Does he send a message asking for guidance, knowing that the answer won't arrive for months? The farmer whose fields have been destroyed might plead with the tax collector, "Sir, you can see with your own eyes that the locusts have eaten our grain. We have barely enough left to feed our families through the winter. If you take the full tax, our children will starve." A reasonable tax collector might reply, "I understand your situation, but I have my orders from the provincial governor. However, I'm authorized to accept payment in installments. Can you pay half the amount now and the other half after next year's harvest?" This kind of practical compromise often works, but it depends on having honest and competent officials at every level of the bureaucracy. Unfortunately, not all Persian administrators live up to these standards. Corruption is a constant problem in any large government, and the Persian Empire is no exception. A dishonest provincial governor might demand extra payments for himself beyond the official tax rates. A corrupt judge might favor the party who offers the largest bribe. A military commander might sell weapons and supplies that are supposed to be used for imperial service. When corruption becomes widespread, it undermines the entire system. Honest taxpayers resent having to pay extra to line officials' pockets. Merchants lose confidence in the legal system if contracts aren't enforced fairly. Military effectiveness suffers if soldiers don't have proper equipment because their commanders have sold it for personal profit. The Persian government tries to prevent corruption through regular inspections, surprise audits, and severe punishments for officials who are caught stealing. But in an empire this large, it's impossible to monitor everyone all the time. Another challenge is managing the empire's incredible ethnic and religious diversity. The Persian policy of tolerance works well most of the time, but it can break down when different groups have conflicting interests or incompatible beliefs. Consider a city where Persian fire worshippers, Babylonian followers of Marduk, Jewish monotheists, and Greek devotees of various Olympic gods all live side by side. Most of the time they get along reasonably well, focusing on their daily business and leaving religious matters to their respective communities. But what happens when the Persians want to build a new fire temple in an area that the Babylonians consider sacred to Marduk? Or when Jewish merchants refuse to work on their Sabbath, disrupting market activities that other communities depend on? Or when Greek athletes want to hold naked sporting competitions that other cultures find deeply offensive? These kinds of conflicts require careful negotiation and compromise. A skilled Persian administrator might propose building the fire temple in a different location, arranging for non-Jewish merchants to handle essential services on the Sabbath, and scheduling athletic competitions in venues where they won't disturb people who object to them. But not all conflicts can be resolved so easily. Sometimes communities have fundamental disagreements that can't be compromised away. When this happens, the Persian government usually tries to establish clear boundaries and rules that everyone must follow, even if not everyone is completely happy with the result. The empire also faces military challenges from groups that refuse to accept Persian rule. In the mountainous regions along the northern and eastern borders, nomadic tribes regularly raid Persian settlements and trade routes. These tribes are difficult to defeat because they can retreat into terrain where Persian armies can't follow effectively. A typical raid might begin with scouts observing a Persian border town, noting its defenses and the schedule of guard patrols. Then, in the dark of night, 50 or 100 mounted warriors would sweep down from the hills, attack the town's grain storage facilities and livestock pens, and disappear back into the mountains before the garrison could respond. The town's residents would wake to find their winter food supplies burned or stolen, their animals driven off, and perhaps some of their neighbors killed or captured. They would send urgent messages to the provincial capital, requesting military assistance and compensation for their losses. The provincial governor would face a difficult choice. He could send a large military expedition to hunt down the raiders, but this would be expensive and might not succeed if the raiders knew the terrain better than his soldiers. He could increase the garrison in frontier towns, but this would require more troops and higher costs, or he could try to negotiate with the tribal leaders, offering them payments to leave Persian territory alone, but this might be seen as a sign of weakness that would encourage more raids. None of these options is perfect, and frontier communities often live with the constant threat of raids as simply one of the hazards of life in the Persian Empire. Despite these challenges, most people in the empire are better off under Persian rule than they were before. The benefits of peace, prosperity, and efficient administration outweigh the problems of taxation, corruption, and occasional conflicts. Let's return to our farming family and see how their lives have changed after 20 years of Persian rule. Darius, now middle-aged, has been able to expand his farm by purchasing additional land from a neighbor who decided to move to the city and become a merchant. His eldest son has learned to read and write, skills that will allow him to work as a scribe or administrator if he chooses not to remain a farmer. His wife has benefited from the new trade connections that Persian rule has brought. She can now buy better tools for spinning and weaving, iron needles instead of bronze ones, and dyes in colors that weren't available when she was young. The cloth she produces is of higher quality and commands better prices in the regional markets. Their youngest daughter has married a young man from a Persian settler family, and their children will grow up truly bilingual, speaking both the local language and Persian, which will give them advantages in business and government service. Do you remember what life was like before the Persians came? Darius might ask his wife as they sit outside their house on a warm evening, watching their grandchildren play in the dusty street. I remember being afraid all the time, she might reply, afraid that bandits would raid our village, afraid that the local governor would demand more than we could pay, afraid that our children would be pressed into service in some war we didn't understand. Now I worry about ordinary things, like whether the harvest will be good and whether we're saving enough money for our old age. The Persians aren't perfect, Darius might say, but they're fair and they keep their word. When they say the tax rate will be 20% of the harvest, it's 20%, not whatever some corrupt official feels like taking. When they promise to protect the trade routes, merchants can actually travel safely. When they say that local customs will be respected, they mean it. This conversation captures something important about the Persian Empire. It isn't loved because it's perfect, but because it's predictable, relatively fair, and generally beneficial to the ordinary people who live under its rule. As we near the end of our journey through daily life in ancient Persia, let's take a moment to consider what made this empire different from its predecessors, and why it lasted for more than 2 centuries. The key insight of the Persian system was understanding that empire doesn't have to be a zero-sum game where the rulers benefit at the expense of the ruled. Instead, empire can be a positive-sum game where everyone benefits from being part of a larger, more prosperous, and more secure system. This required a fundamental shift in thinking about government and administration. Instead of viewing conquered peoples as sources of loot to be extracted as quickly as possible, the Persians saw them as valuable contributors to a larger economic and political system. Instead of imposing their own culture by force, they created a framework within which many different cultures could coexist and prosper. The daily life of ordinary people in the Persian Empire reflects this approach. Farmers pay taxes, but they also benefit from improved security, better infrastructure, and access to larger markets for their products. Craftsmen serve imperial customers, but they also learn new techniques and gain access to superior materials from distant provinces. Merchants pay customs duties, but they also profit from the safe and efficient transportation networks that Persian rule provides. This isn't to say that the Persian Empire was some kind of ancient utopia. There was plenty of inequality, corruption, and oppression, just as there is in any large political system. But compared to the alternatives available in the ancient world, Persian rule offered ordinary people a reasonably good deal. The ruins of Persepolis, burned by Alexander the Great in 330 BCE, still stand today as testimony to the achievements of the Persian Empire. But the real legacy of ancient Persia isn't found in those impressive stone carvings. It's found in the administrative and political innovations that allowed dozens of different peoples to live together peacefully and prosperously for more than 2 centuries. The Persian postal system influenced the development of communication networks throughout the ancient world. Persian administrative techniques were copied by later empires, including Rome. The Persian ideal of religious tolerance provided a model that wouldn't be widely adopted again until much more recent times. Most importantly, the Persian Empire demonstrated that it's possible to create large-scale political unity without requiring cultural uniformity. In our modern world, where people of many different backgrounds must find ways to live together peacefully, the Persian example still has much to teach us. As you drift off to sleep tonight, imagine yourself in that ancient world, perhaps walking along one of those well-maintained royal roads, passing caravanserai where travelers from a dozen different lands share food and stories, heading toward one of those cosmopolitan cities where Persian efficiency and local traditions have blended to create something new and remarkable. The dust of centuries has covered the Persian Empire, but the memory of what they achieved, the idea that diversity can be a source of strength rather than division, that different peoples can cooperate for mutual benefit, that government can serve its people rather than merely exploit them, these ideas live on, as relevant today as they were 2,500 years ago in the courts of Cyrus and Darius, in the markets of Babylon and Persepolis, and in the daily lives of ordinary people who discovered that being part of something larger than themselves could make their own lives richer, safer, and more full of possibility than they had ever imagined. But we haven't yet fully explored the fascinating details of how this empire actually functioned on a day-to-day basis. Let's delve deeper into the intricate systems that kept this vast empire running smoothly for over 2 centuries. The Persian postal system, known as the Angarium, was perhaps the most sophisticated communication network the ancient world had ever seen. Imagine being a royal messenger entrusted with carrying important dispatches across thousands of miles of varied terrain. Your leather satchel contains sealed clay tablets and parchment scrolls bearing the royal seal, messages that might determine the fate of entire provinces. You begin your journey at dawn from the royal palace at Susa, mounting a fresh horse provided by the imperial stables. The morning air is cool, but you know that by midday you'll be riding through desert heat that can kill an unprepared traveler. Your route takes you along the royal road, but this isn't just any highway. It's a carefully engineered marvel of ancient infrastructure. Every stone has been placed with purpose. The road is raised above the surrounding terrain to prevent flooding during the rainy season. Drainage channels run along both sides, carrying away water that might otherwise turn the roadway into impassable mud. At regular intervals, stone mile markers indicate the distance to the next way station, carved with inscriptions in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian so that travelers from any part of the empire can read them. The engineering challenges involved in building these roads were enormous. In mountainous regions, Persian engineers carved ledges into solid rock faces, creating pathways wide enough for laden pack animals and military supply wagons. Where roads crossed rivers, they built stone bridges with multiple arches, designed to withstand spring floods that could wash away lesser structures. In desert areas, the road builders faced different problems. Sand dunes could shift overnight, burying sections of roadway. The solution was to build the roadbed from carefully fitted stone slabs, heavy enough that sand couldn't easily cover them, and to station crews of workers whose job was to keep the route clear. As our messenger rides through the morning, he passes other travelers heading in both directions. A merchant caravan from India struggles past, their camels loaded with bales of silk and bags of precious spices. The merchants eye the royal messenger with a mixture of respect and curiosity. They know that imperial messengers have absolute priority on the roads, and that interfering with royal communications is a crime punishable by death. "Peace be upon you, messenger of the great king," the caravan leader calls out as they pass. "What news from the capital?" But our messenger doesn't slow down. Imperial protocol forbids him from discussing the contents of his dispatches with civilians, and besides, he has a schedule to maintain. The postal system works because every messenger knows exactly how far he must travel each day and where he will change horses. By noon he reaches the first way station, a fortified compound that serves multiple functions. It's part inn, part fortress, part government office, and part veterinary clinic. The station keeper has already prepared a fresh horse, having been alerted to the messenger's approach by smoke signals from watchtowers along the route. The station keeper, a grizzled veteran of 20 years of imperial service, greets the messenger with professional efficiency. "Your horse is ready, sir. Fresh oats and water. New shoes fitted yesterday. The road ahead is clear, but there are reports of bandits in the hills near the third station. The garrison commander there has been notified and will provide an escort if needed." The messenger transfers his dispatches to the new horse's saddlebags, drinks a cup of cool water from the station's well, and sets off again within minutes. This precision timing is what allows messages to travel from one end of the empire to the other in just a few weeks, a speed that won't be matched again until the invention of the telegraph more than 2,000 years later. Meanwhile, the way station continues its other functions. A group of merchants arrives, seeking shelter for the night and fodder for their animals. They pay the standard fees and are assigned sleeping spaces in the common dormitory. Their goods are stored in a secure warehouse, and their animals are tended by the station's grooms. "Have you heard the latest news from Babylon?" one merchant asks another as they share an evening meal of bread, cheese, and weak beer. "What news is that?" his companion replies. "The great king has ordered the construction of a new canal, connecting the Euphrates to the Tigris. They say it will make transportation of goods much easier and reduce the cost of grain in all the major cities." "That's good news for traders like us," the first merchant responds. "Cheaper transportation means higher profits. But I wonder how they'll find enough workers for such a massive project." "The same way they always do," his friend answers. "Part paid labor, part corvée duty from the local population, and part prisoners of war. The Persians are masters at organizing large construction projects." This conversation touches on another crucial aspect of Persian administration, the corvée system. Every able-bodied male in the empire owed a certain amount of labor service to the state each year, typically during the agricultural off-season when farm work was light. This labor might be used for road maintenance, canal construction, or building projects in major cities. For a farmer like our friend Darius, corvée duty might mean spending 2 weeks each winter working on local road repairs. He and his neighbors would gather at the district administrator's office, receive their assignments, and then spend their days moving stones, clearing drainage ditches, or rebuilding sections of roadway damaged by the previous year's weather. "It's hard work," Darius might complain to his neighbor as they struggle to position a heavy stone block, "but I have to admit the roads are in much better condition than they were before the Persians arrived. My grain sells for a better price now because merchants can transport it more easily to the big city markets." "True," his neighbor might reply, "and the work gangs are well organized. We get good tools, adequate food, and competent supervision. I've heard stories about how other empires handle forced labor, and we're lucky to be under Persian rule." The corvée system worked because it was perceived as reasonably fair. The labor requirements were clearly specified and limited in duration. Workers were provided with food, tools, and medical care. Most importantly, the projects they worked on provided obvious benefits to their own communities. But the Persian Empire wasn't built solely on the labor of its own citizens. It also relied heavily on slavery, though Persian slavery was somewhat different from the systems used by other ancient civilizations. Many Persian slaves were prisoners of war, captured during the empire's various military campaigns. But rather than being worked to death in mines or on plantations, as was common elsewhere, Persian slaves were often integrated into the imperial administration or trained in valuable crafts. A captured Greek architect might find himself designing buildings for Persian nobles, living in comfortable quarters and receiving good food and clothing in exchange for his expertise. A Phoenician sailor might be assigned to the imperial navy, helping to navigate Persian ships through unfamiliar waters. An Egyptian scribe might be employed in the provincial administration, using his literacy skills to help manage tax records and official correspondence. This doesn't mean that Persian slavery was humane by modern standards. Slaves had no legal rights, could be bought and sold like property, and were completely dependent on their master's goodwill. But compared to the brutal treatment of slaves in some other ancient societies, Persian slavery offered at least the possibility of a tolerable existence and even eventual freedom. Some slaves earned their freedom through exceptional service. Others were freed by masters who had grown fond of them or wanted to reward their loyalty. A few even managed to purchase their own freedom with money they had saved from small business ventures or gifts from grateful employers. Let's follow the story of one such slave, a young woman named Roxana. Though that wasn't her original name, she was captured as a child during a Persian raid on a Scythian settlement north of the Black Sea. Her parents were killed in the fighting, and she was taken along with dozens of other captives to be sold in the slave markets of Babylon. But Roxana was lucky, if such a word can be applied to slavery. She was purchased by a wealthy Persian merchant who noticed her intelligence and quick learning ability. Instead of using her for heavy labor, he had her trained as a household administrator, teaching her to read and write in Persian, Aramaic, and Babylonian. As she grew older, Roxana became indispensable to her master's business operations. She managed his household staff, negotiated with suppliers, and even handled some of his correspondence with trading partners in distant cities. Her master began to rely on her judgment in business matters, and gradually gave her more responsibility and freedom. Roxana, her master might say as he prepares for a trading voyage to Egypt, "I'm leaving you in charge of the household while I'm away. The grain shipment should arrive next week, and the textile orders need to be completed by the end of the month. You know my business better than anyone, so use your own judgment in handling any problems that arise." "Yes, sir," Roxana would reply. "I'll send regular reports to you in Alexandria, and I'll make sure everything is ready for your return." Such arrangements weren't unusual in the Persian Empire. Slaves who proved themselves capable and trustworthy often became virtual business partners with their masters, sharing in the profits and enjoying considerable autonomy in their daily lives. After 15 years of faithful service, Roxana's master granted her freedom as a reward for her loyalty and competence. But freedom didn't mean abandonment. She continued to work with her former master as a paid employee and business partner, eventually establishing her own trading company that specialized in luxury goods from the northern provinces. Roxana's story illustrates another important aspect of Persian society: the opportunities for social mobility that existed despite the empire's hierarchical structure. While birth and family connections certainly mattered, merit and hard work could also lead to advancement. The Persian Empire needed capable administrators, skilled craftsmen, successful merchants, and competent military officers. People who could fill these roles effectively were valued regardless of their ethnic background or social origins. A Babylonian farmer's son might become a provincial governor if he demonstrated the necessary abilities. An Egyptian priest's daughter might become a court physician if she mastered the required medical knowledge. This meritocratic element helped to stabilize the empire by giving ambitious individuals a stake in the system's success. Instead of plotting rebellion, talented people from conquered territories often chose to work within the Persian system, seeking advancement through loyal service. Consider the career of a young man named Artabazus, whose grandfather had been a minor chieftain in a Median tribe before the Persian conquest. Artabazus grew up speaking both Persian and Median, and received a good education in mathematics, literature, and military arts. As a teenager, he served as a page in the court of a Persian satrap, learning the intricacies of imperial administration. His intelligence and diligence impressed his superiors, and he was gradually given more responsible assignments. First, he served as a secretary to a tax collector, learning how the imperial revenue system worked. Then he was appointed as an assistant to a military commander, gaining experience in logistics and personnel management. By his 30th birthday, he had been promoted to the position of district administrator, responsible for governing a region that included several cities and dozens of villages. The key to successful administration, Artabazus might tell a newly appointed subordinate, is to understand that we serve both the great king and the people we govern. Our job is to collect the taxes that keep the empire running, but also to ensure that the people are treated fairly and that their legitimate grievances are addressed. But what if those two objectives conflict? The subordinate might ask. What if the tax quotas are too high for people to pay without hardship? Then we report the situation to higher authority and request adjustments. Artabazus would reply. The Persian system works because it's flexible. A province that's been devastated by earthquake or drought can't pay the same taxes as one that's had good harvests. Our superiors understand this, but they can't make appropriate adjustments unless we provide them with accurate information. This conversation reflects the Persian Empire's sophisticated approach to governance. Unlike some ancient empires that ruled through fear and arbitrary authority, the Persian system relied on professional administrators who were expected to use their judgment and initiative in dealing with local conditions. But what about the daily lives of the Persian elite, the nobles and court officials who lived in the great palaces and enjoyed the wealth that flowed in from the empire's far-flung provinces? Let's visit the household of a high-ranking Persian nobleman during the reign of Darius I. His palace, though smaller than the royal residences, is still an impressive complex of buildings arranged around courtyards filled with flowering trees and ornamental pools. The morning begins before dawn with the household staff preparing for the day's activities. Servants draw water from deep wells, tend the fires that heat the bathhouses, and prepare elaborate meals in kitchens equipped with the finest bronze and iron utensils available anywhere in the ancient world. The nobleman himself rises early, following the Persian custom of greeting the dawn with prayers to Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of the Zoroastrian religion. He washes in heated water scented with rose petals, dresses in fine linen and wool clothing, dyed with expensive pigments from distant lands, and breaks his fast with bread, fruit and wine mixed with honey. His wife, following the customs of noble Persian women, manages the household's domestic affairs with skill and authority. She supervises dozens of servants, oversees the education of their children, and manages the complex social relationships that are essential to maintaining the family's position in the court hierarchy. The governor's wife has invited us to attend her daughter's wedding celebration next month. She might tell her husband as they discuss the day's schedule. This will be an important social occasion. The great king's own brother is expected to attend, along with officials from several provinces. Then we must prepare an appropriate gift, her husband would reply. Perhaps that set of silver vessels we acquired from the Lydian craftsman, or the silk tapestries that arrived last week from the Eastern territories. I was thinking of the tapestries, his wife would agree. They're beautiful and exotic enough to impress the other guests, but not so valuable as to seem ostentatious. Such conversations reveal the intricate social dynamics that governed life among the Persian elite. Every interaction was carefully calculated to maintain family honor, build useful alliances, and demonstrate appropriate respect for the empire's hierarchical structure. The nobleman's day might include a morning spent reviewing reports from his various business enterprises. Like most Persian nobles, he doesn't rely solely on government salary or royal grants for his wealth. He also owns farms, workshops, and trading ventures that require constant management and oversight. The olive harvest in our Syrian estates was better than expected, his chief steward might report during their daily meeting. We should have enough surplus to export to Babylon and Susa, where olive oil commands premium prices. Excellent, the nobleman would reply. And what about the textile workshop in Sardis? Production is up, sir, but we're having trouble finding enough skilled dyers. The demand for purple cloth has increased since the court adopted new ceremonial protocols, but there are only a few craftsmen who know the secrets of producing the finest grades of dye. Then we'll have to pay higher wages to attract the best workers. The nobleman would decide. Quality is more important than short-term profits. Our reputation for producing the finest textiles in the empire is worth more than the extra costs. After dealing with business matters, the nobleman might spend time with his children, particularly his sons, who are being groomed for careers in imperial service. Persian noble education emphasized physical training, military skills, literature, mathematics, and the arts of governance. Remember, he might tell his eldest son as they practice archery in the palace courtyard. A Persian nobleman must excel in all the traditional skills. You must be able to ride a horse, draw a bow, speak the truth, and serve the great king with honor. These are the foundations of our people's strength. The afternoon might be devoted to social obligations, perhaps visiting other noble families, attending court ceremonies, or participating in the elaborate hunting expeditions that were a favorite pastime of the Persian elite. These hunts weren't simply recreational activities. They served important social and political functions, allowing nobles to demonstrate their courage and skill, build relationships with their peers, and show their loyalty to the great king or his representatives. A typical hunt might involve dozens of participants, hundreds of beaters and support staff, and elaborate logistics that rivaled military campaigns in their complexity. The quarry might be lions from the Mesopotamian plains, wild boar from the Zagros Mountains, or the exotic animals that were specially imported for royal hunting preserves. Tomorrow we hunt the royal lions in the preserve near Persepolis. the nobleman might announce to his household. The great king himself will be present, along with satraps from 6 provinces. This is an opportunity to demonstrate our family's continued loyalty and competence. The evening would be spent in formal dining, another crucial aspect of Persian noble culture. These weren't simple meals, but elaborate social rituals that could last for hours and involve complex protocols of etiquette and precedence. The dining hall would be decorated with the finest carpets, tapestries, and precious objects that the household possessed. Guests would recline on couches arranged according to their social rank, with the most honored positions reserved for those of highest status. The meal itself would consist of multiple courses, featuring delicacies from every corner of the empire: roasted peacock from India, stuffed dates from Mesopotamia, fine wines from the western provinces, and exotic spices that had traveled thousands of miles along the empire's trade routes. "My friends," the host might address his guests as the evening's festivities began, "we are blessed to live in an age when the wisdom of the great King Darius has brought peace and prosperity to the world. Tonight we enjoy the fruits of that peace, foods and wines from every land under Persian rule." The guests would raise their cups in response, toasting the health of the great king and the continued success of the empire. But these toasts weren't empty gestures. They represented genuine gratitude for the system that had made their comfortable lives possible. Yet even among the Persian elite, life wasn't without its anxieties and challenges. Court politics could be treacherous, with ambitious nobles constantly maneuvering for advantage. A family's fortunes could rise or fall depending on their relationship with the royal family and their ability to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries that characterized imperial administration. Moreover, the Persian elite were expected to provide military service when called upon. Unlike some aristocracies that became purely ornamental, Persian nobles were required to maintain their warrior skills and to lead troops in battle when the empire faced external threats. This military obligation meant that even the most comfortable Persian nobleman lived with the knowledge that he might be called away from his pleasant palace to face hardship and danger on some distant frontier. The empire's security depended on the courage and competence of its noble class, and that responsibility was taken seriously. But for most Persian nobles most of the time, life was pleasant and rewarding. They enjoyed material comforts that were unavailable to the vast majority of people in the ancient world. They had opportunities to participate in governing the largest empire in human history, and they lived in a cosmopolitan environment where they could encounter ideas, art, and culture from dozens of different civilizations. This cultural sophistication is evident in the art and architecture that the Persian elite commissioned for their palaces and tombs. Persian artists and craftsmen drew inspiration from Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Greek, and Central Asian traditions, creating a distinctive imperial style that reflected the empire's diverse character. The walls of a Persian nobleman's palace might be decorated with relief carvings showing scenes from epic literature, painted murals depicting animals and plants from distant provinces, and inlaid metalwork incorporating designs from multiple cultural traditions. "I want this room to reflect the glory of our empire," a nobleman might instruct the artist he has commissioned to decorate his new reception hall. "Show the peoples of all lands bringing tribute to the great king, but make sure each group is depicted with respect and accuracy. We are not conquerors who despise our subjects, but rulers who value their contributions to our common prosperity." The result would be a work of art that celebrated both Persian power and the cultural diversity that was one of the empire's greatest strengths. As we near the end of our extended journey through the daily life of ancient Persia, it's worth reflecting on how this remarkable civilization managed to maintain its unity and effectiveness for so many generations. The secret wasn't just military might, though the Persian army was certainly formidable. It wasn't just administrative efficiency, though the Persian bureaucracy was remarkably sophisticated for its time. The real secret was the Persian understanding that an empire is ultimately a human institution, and that it can only succeed if it serves the needs and aspirations of the people who live within it. This meant creating a system where different peoples could maintain their own identities while participating in a larger whole. It meant establishing laws and institutions that were perceived as fair, even by those who had been conquered. It meant building an economy that benefited everyone, from the humblest farmer to the highest noble. Most importantly, it meant recognizing that diversity could be a source of strength rather than weakness. Instead of trying to force everyone to become Persian, the empire created space for many different ways of being human to coexist and flourish. The legacy of this approach can still be seen today, in the ruins of Persepolis where delegates from dozens of nations are carved in stone, in the administrative techniques that influenced later empires, and in the ideal of tolerance that the Persian Empire pioneered. As you settle into sleep tonight, imagine yourself once more in that ancient world, perhaps sitting in a garden in Babylon, listening to the sound of flowing water and the distant music of street musicians, surrounded by the comfortable bustle of a cosmopolitan city where Persian efficiency has created the conditions for human creativity and prosperity to flourish.